continuing unrest. Bangladesh sees no end to the violence as protests erupt in multiple cities against quota systems and unfair arrests. Waning hopes. Rescue efforts continue in India's Kerala state as the death toll continues to mount, the prospects of finding any more survivors seeming bleak. A fiery race. Harris and Trump level increasingly heavy blows against each other's campaigns as the polls indicate a very tight fight to the finish line. The eagle has landed. An Ecoline friend is brought under the wing of patrol officers who care for the grounded bird. All that and more as World News Tonight starts right now.
This is Derana World News Tonight. Reporting from Colombo, here is Sanuvi Mudanayaka.
Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight. Thank you very much for taking the time to tune in. There are a plethora of updates on key stories to bring you this evening. And we start in neighbouring Bangladesh, where the situation turns yet more unstable. Fresh violence has broken out in Bangladesh between police and student protesters demanding justice for victims of recent unrest. Clashes were reported in the capital Dhaka and other cities today. In the northeastern city of Sylhet, an official claimed demonstrators had attacked police who in turn used tear gas.
Police detain a student and drag him into a van. Protesters marching against state violence and intimidation once again found themselves up against it. Dhaka and the port city of Chittagong were among several places where scuffles broke out. Police arrested several students, using force, they said, because protesters had broken through barricades. Rights groups have condemned close to 10,000 arrests and some 200 deaths in a violent crackdown over the past few weeks, after student-led protests began in June against quotas in government jobs. In recent weeks, Bangladesh shut down the internet and sent the army to enforce a nationwide curfew. Restrictions have since been eased, but on Tuesday, the UN said it had concerns.
The Secretary General is concerned about reported mass arrests of thousands of young people and political opposition, about the excessive use of force by security forces, and credible evidence of human rights violation.
Rights groups say Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has become increasingly autocratic. Her government has said it will ban the Jamaat-e-Islami party, as well as its student wing, both of which it blames for violence during the protests. The European Union said it's postponed talks with Dhaka on a new cooperation pact because of the situation.
And over in India now, hopes of finding more than 180 people missing alive waned as rescue workers searched through mud and debris after landslides set off by torrential rains killed close to 200 people in Kerala.
Soldiers and rescuers worked through slush and rocks under steady rain, looking for survivors and searching for bodies in the hills of India's Kerala state on Wednesday, a day after scores of people were killed in monsoon landslides. Huddled in shelters, survivors said they had lost everything. Around 1,000 people had been rescued from the hillside villages and tea and cardamom estates in Wayanad district, but authorities said many were still missing. Heavy rain in Kerala led to the landslides early on Tuesday, sending torrents of mud, water and tumbling boulders downhill and burying or sweeping people away to their deaths as they slept. It was the worst disaster in the state since deadly floods in 2018. Experts said the area had been receiving heavy rainfall in the last 2 weeks, which had softened the soil, and that extremely heavy rainfall on Monday triggered the landslides. The Indian Army said it had begun the process to construct an alternate bridge after the main bridge linking the worst affected area to the nearest town was destroyed. The region hit by the landslide was forecast to get 8 inches of rainfall, but ended up getting 22.5 inches over a period of 48 hours, Kerala's chief minister said on Tuesday. India has witnessed extreme weather conditions in recent years, from torrential rain and floods to droughts and cyclones, blamed by some experts on climate change.
Israel's back-to-back assassinations in the Middle East have made the region's situation increasingly uncertain, with Iran officially declaring its intention to retaliate against Israel. Fears of a wider conflict in the Middle East are growing.
The Iranian supreme leader has ordered a retaliation attack in Israel for the killing of a top Hamas leader in Iran's capital, Tehran. The New York Times reported on Wednesday that Ayatollah Ali Khamenei vowed revenge during an emergency national security meeting. It added that Khamenei, who's also the country's highest military commander, instructed that a defense scenario be prepared in case Israel or the US attacks Iran. Ismail Haniyeh, the political chief of Hamas, was in Tehran attending the inauguration of Iran's new president. After Haniyeh's assassination on Wednesday, Khamenei stated that our guest has been martyred and that it is Iran's duty to exact a blood price. The New York Times reported that Iran is also considering simultaneous attacks from Yemen, Syria and Iraq to maximize the impact of the retaliation. The Iranian Revolutionary Guards issued an unusual 2 statements on the same matter, condemning the assassination in the strongest words. Iran's allies and proxy groups against Israel also denounced the assassination. Hamas stated that it will not stand by and watch what it called Israel's cowardly actions, while Yemen's Houthi rebels said the Haniyeh's assassination is a terrorist crime. Hezbollah also declared that the resistance of anti-Israel alliances would become even stronger. Meanwhile, on Wednesday, the U.S. White House stated it is taking special care to prevent escalation, denying that a larger conflict is imminent. The U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump have also not issued any statements on the situation so far.
President Nicolas Maduro asked Venezuela's High Court to conduct an audit of the presidential election after opposition leaders disputed his claim of victory, drawing criticism from protesters who said the court is too close to the government to produce an independent review.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro says that his Socialist Party is prepared to present all vote tallies from Sunday's election. Maduro has also said that he requested the country's top court to ensure all other political parties in Venezuela do the same. Maduro also claimed that the attorney's office should call all political parties and their candidates to testify in an investigation related to alleged election interference, such as cyber attacks, attacks on polling stations, and the offices of the National Electoral Council. Maduro's re-election has been under scrutiny for lack of transparency by the international community, including the majority of Latin American countries, to the extent of hindering their diplomatic ties. Nicolas Maduro, who has ruled Venezuela for a quarter century, claimed he'd won a 3rd term with 51% of the vote on Sunday, while independent exit polls showed a big opposition win.
Amid shadows of doping fears and triumphs from sporting legends, yet another day filled with events carried on at the Olympic Games over in France. The key events in focus were rowing, tennis and race walking. Fears of COVID infection also spread as the Australian swimming team struggled to maintain their cluster. Here are some more updates on how the Games are going now.
The COVID cluster in rowing, it was neck and neck in the final stretch, but what a result it was. The defending champions Romania had the lead at the halfway mark, but New Zealand powered through to take the gold. In men's rowing double sculls, Romania pipped the Dutch to gold, with Ireland taking bronze. Marian Florian Enaș and Andrei Sebastian Cornea of Romania stole the gold at the death, reaching a high of 47 strokes a minute.
Let's take a short commercial break. More world news on the other side. And on the road to the White House tonight, the race continues to blaze on as both camps level yet more criticisms against each other. Polls show Kamala Harris tied with Trump. However, there are questions on Harris's future diplomacy with heavyweights like China and Russia due to her poor handling of the US border crisis.
Donald Trump has questioned Kamala Harris's racial identity during a heated exchange at a convention for black journalists. Trump claimed the vice president and presumptive Democratic nominee had only emphasized her Asian American heritage until recently, when he claimed, quote, she became a black person, end quote. Kamala Harris has shrugged off Donald Trump's questioning of her racial identity, saying that it was the same old show and that America deserves better at a rally in Texas. Meanwhile, scrutiny over Vice President Kamala Harris's ability to lead the nation took center stage after she became the most likely challenger to take on the race for the White House from the Democrats. Vice President Harris's handling of the U.S. immigration crisis has drawn condemnation from Republicans in Congress. And on more recent reactions during a campaign speech in Glendale, Arizona, Trump campaign vice presidential candidate Senator J.D. Vance slammed the plea deal taken by 3 of the terrorists behind the September 11th terror attacks, awaiting trial in Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. The Ohio Republican called out the Biden-Harris administration, who he said has weaponized the Department of Justice to go after their political opponents, but cutting a sweetheart deal with 9/11 terrorists.
The U.S. Department of Defense says 3 of the men accused of plotting the 11 September 2001 attacks on the U.S. have entered into a pre-trial agreement. The men have been held at the U.S. Navy base at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, for years without going to trial. Details of the deal have not been announced, but it is predicted the men will plead guilty in exchange for the prosecution agreeing not to seek the death penalty.
The accused mastermind of the September 11th attacks, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and 2 of his accomplices, all held at the U.S. military prison at Guantanamo Bay, have agreed to plead guilty. The Pentagon announced the development on Wednesday without elaborating on the plea deals. However, a U.S. official speaking on condition of anonymity said the deals almost certainly involved guilty pleas in exchange for taking the death penalty off the table. Mohammed is accused of masterminding the plot to fly hijacked commercial passenger aircraft into the World Trade Center in New York City and into the Pentagon on September 11, 2001. The attacks killed nearly 3,000 people and plunged the United States into what would become a 2-decade-long war in Afghanistan. Mohammed is the most well-known inmate at the detention facility in Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. The prison was set up in 2002 by then U.S. President George W. Bush to house foreign militant suspects following the September 11th attacks. Its population grew to a peak of about 800 inmates before it started to shrink. Only 30 inmates remain today. Mohammed's interrogations have long been the subject of scrutiny. A 2014 Senate Intelligence Committee report on the CIA's use of waterboarding and other, quote, enhanced interrogation techniques said that Mohammed had been waterboarded at least 183 times.
Thousands of firefighters battling a massive Northern California wildfire were working in milder temperatures and high humidity. But the blaze that destroyed more than 100 structures since it began 5 days ago continues to grow.
Tonight, new video from firefighters on the front lines showing the all-out battle to control the park fire. But those fire hoses, no match for the roaring flames. Thousands of personnel have been battling the blaze for nearly a week, trying to stop the forward spread of the largest fire in California. The park fire climbing another rung in the record books. Now, California's 5th biggest fire on record. Authorities lifting evacuation orders for the town of Paradise, the town ravaged by the Camp Fire back in 2018.
A 70-year-old has been charged with the murder of 3 girls at a dance class in Southport in the UK. A 6, 7 and 9-year-old died after a knife attack at a Taylor Swift-themed event in the Merseyside town. The teenager, who is due to appear at Liverpool City Magistrates Court, has been charged with 10 counts of attempted murder. Protests against the tragedy continue to grow rampant.
Southport cleaning up as the city continues to mourn. Tuesday evening, its streets were the scene of violent clashes, protesters throwing bricks at police and setting vehicles on fire. The riot broke out just a few streets away from an earlier vigil for the victims of Monday's mass stabbing that left 3 young girls dead and 8 others wounded. Officials believe far-right agitators are behind the unrest. Some 50 officers were hurt. The violence erupted when around 100 rioters began to throw bricks at a nearby mosque. Police have connected them to the English Defence League, a far-right anti-Muslim group. They'd been fired up by misinformation on right-wing social media suggesting an Islamist link to the stabbing. Police have arrested a 17-year-old suspect in Monday's attack. They have yet to reveal his identity, confirming only that he was born in the UK. Prime Minister Keir Starmer had been at Tuesday's vigil. He later condemned the ensuing violence on social media. Monday's victims had been at a children's yoga class dancing to Taylor Swift when the attack unfolded. The singer says it has left her in shock. Her fans, meanwhile, have raised more than 320,000 euros for the victims and the local hospital where they've been treated.
Boeing named aerospace industry veteran Kelly Ortberg as its president and CEO after a months-long search, tasking the former Rockwell Collins executive with the monumental job of turning around the struggling plane maker.
Ortberg, a former executive at aerospace company Rockwell Collins, faces a multitude of issues at Boeing, including reviving jet production and rebuilding trust with regulators, the industry, and the public. One of the two global plane makers, Boeing has been mired in a reputational and safety crisis after a January 5th mid-air cabin panel blowout on an Alaska Airlines-operated MAX 9 jet carrying 171 passengers. That led to an executive reshuffle in which CEO Dave Calhoun decided to step down by the end of the year. Calhoun will be a special advisor to the board until March 2025. One analyst called Ortberg a strong and safe pick, while Jeffries in a note referred to him as a tough negotiator. That could help Ortberg as he tries to integrate Spirit Aerosystems back into Boeing's fold after it clinched a deal earlier this year to buy back the fuselage maker. Ortberg starts August 8th. Boeing shares were up more than 3% in Wednesday afternoon trading.
Let's go in for a short commercial break. More world news right after this. Welcome back. Yesterday we brought to you the story of a delicate rescue of a feline friend. Well, today there is an avian in need of saving. The aquiline friend was struggling while grounded. Thankfully, some kind patrol officers took it under their wing.
The eagle has landed in the back seat of a patrol car. Yes, it was in trouble. But it wasn't a jailbird. It was in need of being rescued. An officer in Arizona was patrolling traffic around roadside construction when the crew there spotted the eagle under his patrol car, seemingly in distress. Using a blanket, the officer picked up the bird and carefully moved it to the back seat, giving it time to cool off after being underneath the car. Experts from an animal rescue center came to pick up the eagle. Apparently, it was a baby eagle that was separated from its parents and likely would not have survived if it wasn't brought into their care.
And with that, we mark the end of today's bulletin. We will see you again tomorrow with the latest happenings across the globe. Stay tuned as Sina Mayadune will join you next with the nightly business report. Thank you for watching. Good night.